Hello and welcome back to Miniage Painting. This video is part 2 of my Stormborn Collectibles diorama, where I will be painting 2 of their miniatures as a collaboration. You can find the first video in the description or in the pinned section there. Once again, if you or someone you know would be interested in collaboration, let me know in the comments below. Let's get started with Nyxara and use some vibrant colors. Since she's a demon, we're going to paint all of her skin with Mephiston red. We'll also use this color for the fingers of her wings. For all the cloth, I'm going to use corn red for a deeper red that will look similar, yet different from the skin tones. Now, I'm going to coat the cloak with Abaddon black. We'll also take this color to the edges of the tassels that hang from her waist. If you mess up like I did a couple of times and get some of the black onto the corn red, don't worry for now, as we can fix that later. For now though, I'm going to take some Bugman's Glow and carefully coat the membranes of Nyxara's wings, being extra careful not to hit the red of her wing fingers, as it's harder to clean up than the tassels. Moving on to her hair, let's use Xandri dust and apply it to her wavy golden locks. Let's take some Rakarth flesh and apply this to the horns on her head, the skull in her hand, the spikes on her ankles, and the spikes on her wings. There are a lot of small details on this model, and I personally love it. How about we paint the armor panels that she is wearing with some lead belcher? I'll paint this color onto her waist guards, chest guards, belt, the details on the front tassel, and shoulder guards. Moving on to shading. We'll start with some Nuln Oil on the corn red of the cloth. This is to deepen the red, creating more distance from the bright skin. I'll also take this color and apply it all over the Rakarth flesh I applied to the bone details, and all of the armor. Speaking of the skin, let's take some Carroburg Crimson and coat all of that fabulously vibrant red. This is to slightly darken the skin, without taking away too much of the vibrancy that I want to keep. We can then take some Reikland Flesh Shade to the wing membranes. I will only apply this to portions of the membranes that touch the fingers and the inner folds. Let's work through the red cloth first. I'm going to take some more corn red and apply this to the tops of the folds in a stippling motion. Stippling is when you take the brush and dab it onto the area where you want paint. Again with the stippling, we'll apply some Wazdaka red to a slightly smaller area. Leave some of the corn red behind in order to get a gradient to the next highlight. The next highlight is Squig Orange. Really focus this color onto the highest points of the folds and the parts that would catch the most light. Moving on to the dark black robes, we are going to leave the inner folds of the cloak as Abaddon black, but we are going to take some Dark Reaper and mix this with the Abaddon in a 1:1 ratio. Then take this and paint it onto the outer folds. We can then take pure Dark Reaper and apply this as a highlight, covering half of the mix we applied in the last step. With this done, we can take some Thunderhawk Blue as an edge highlight to all of the sharp details of the cloak. Really try to focus on the higher edges that would catch the light. Finally, we'll take some Fenrisian Gray to the sharpest of the edges and the highest corners that would catch the most light. With that, we have a nice cloak with some realistic highlights. Moving on to the skin tones, I took some Wild Rider Red and applied it to the legs and face as a highlight on the most prominent surfaces. This left the skin with a more orange-like coloration, and I really wanted it to be a vibrant red, so I took some Mephiston red and applied it over the Wild Rider as a glaze in order to get a very bright red. The horns, skull, and spikes on the wings were first highlighted with a bit of Carrick stone. This color was focused on the higher points of the horns, keeping away from the shaded details that the Nuln Oil picked out. A final highlight of Upshanti bone was applied to the tips of the horns and wing spikes. For the wing spikes, I only highlighted the tips, and the horns got paint applied to 1/3 of the top portion. Moving back to the wings, I first highlighted with some Cadian flesh tone in a streaking motion across the whole of the wing membrane. This is to help sell the effect of it being a thin material. A final highlight of Kislev flesh was applied to the higher points of the folds that the wings had. This color was selected to complement the others and to give it a bit more visual interest to the wings. I felt the face was missing a little something special, so I took some Dark Reaper and gave her a little bit of an eyeshadow, as well as some lipstick. I don't normally highlight lips like this, but I felt that it was appropriate for her. The metallics were highlighted with Rune Fang Steel. Taking this color and applying it as an edge highlight and running it along most of the more prominent sculpted details of the armor. The hair will first be highlighted using some Upshanti bone. This was applied to the top of her head and the tops of the strands that flowed underneath the horns. Wrapping up Nyxara, I applied Skeleton Horde to the hair in order to tie the colors into one another. Now, let's work on the base for the diorama. I took the base that comes included with Luna's 75mm version and started mapping out what I wanted to do with some corkboard, ripping multiple pieces apart in order to make a tower of sorts. I was thinking of a frozen cliffside confrontation between the two of them. In order for Luna to be looking directly into the face of Nyxara, she needed to be elevated, as Nyx was taller than Luna. So I took a few more pieces of cork and created a more raised position. Now that I had mapped the base out, it was time to glue everything together using super glue. Starting with the base of Luna, I worked down towards the bottom. I did not glue the cork to the stand, however, as that would make it easier to airbrush later. With the corkboard glued together, it was time to add some texture paste. I used Huge Miniatures Stone Texture Paste. This stuff hardens fairly quickly and is really easy to use. Once I got enough onto the base, I primed it using a rattle can. Now, let's get into painting. I used an airbrush for this because I wanted smooth transitions from the colors, and this was a fairly easy way to do it. You can use a brush if you want to. Either way, my first color of choice was Naggaroth Night for the shadows and underside of the cliff. Following that, I used some Sotek Green for the base layer of the top of the cliff. I also sprayed a little of this color onto the sides of the cliff. Without cleaning my airbrush, I added Caligar Blue and began airbrushing in somewhat random spots around the cliff. This and the next steps are going to give some visual difference to the base itself. Once that ran out, I added some Baharoth Blue and did the same thing as the previous steps. As a final highlight color, I added a little bit of Pallid Witch Flesh to the airbrush and applied this around the cliff. Only now did I clean out my airbrush and switch back to Naggaroth Night. I wanted to darken the area where Nyxara would stand in order to emphasize that she doesn't normally belong in this environment. As a final step, I took more Mephiston Red and sprayed this over the spots where Nyx will be standing, giving that corner of the cliff a more hell-touched vibe. With the airbrushing down, I glued Luna onto the base so that I could start to add the snow and incorporate her into the scene a bit more. Now it was time to add some Valhallan Blizzard to the base. I applied this in patches to any of the portions that were flatter than the rest, as well as making sure to apply some to the bottoms of Luna's robes and avoiding the area around Nyxara. I had seen a few people take some water to Valhallan Blizzard to give some of the snow a different sort of texture. I wanted to try this out on some of the snow and see what would happen. After letting it dry, the water didn't do too much, but it does seem like it did make the snow more uniform in the areas that it was applied. Ultimately, this isn't an important step, but I learned something new. Now let's get ready for the grand reveal. I have to give a huge shout out to Stormborn Collectibles for sending me these models to print and paint. They have been a lot of fun. You can get Nyxara, Demon of the Night, on his My Mini Factory Tribes page this month. There will be a link to his tribe in the description below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It means the world to me. I recently set up a Discord server for the channel as well. If you're interested, check it out in the description. I'd love to chat with you all and see your paintings. Until next time, I've been Miniage Painting, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.